You probably saw the headlines about trucks backed up at the border and helicopters circling overhead and assumed this was just another episode in a familiar political drama. Another tough-talking leader, another border crackdown, another round of chest-thumping between Washington and Ottawa. But if that is all you saw, you missed what is actually happening here, and more importantly, why it matters so deeply for how power functions inside the North American economy. Because this is not really about drugs, it is not really about security, and it is not even primarily about Donald Trump or Mark Carney as personalities. What we are watching is the deliberate exposure of an economic system that was engineered to look efficient only as long as no one ever applied pressure to it. On the surface, the action was simple. Canadian authorities instructed border agents to manually inspect every commercial truck entering from the United States, every pallet, every container, every crate. At the same time, enforcement presence was visibly increased, including aerial patrols. The official explanation was straightforward: border integrity, safety, accountability. If the United States claims Canada is a weak link in controlling illicit flows, then Canada would remove all ambiguity by inspecting everything. Procedural, technical, almost boring. But here is the deeper reality that most coverage avoided. Modern North American trade is not designed to survive friction. It is designed to survive speed. The entire system of cross-border production assumes that trucks will move almost continuously. Auto plants do not store weeks of components. Grocery distributors do not warehouse months of food. Everything is timed, sequenced, and synchronized to arrive just in time. Not because that benefits workers or communities, but because inventory costs money and cuts into margins. Speed protects capital. When you introduce a hard pause into that system, even briefly, the system does not bend. It snaps. Factories slow. Assembly lines face shutdowns because one missing component halts an entire process. Perishable goods spoil. Drivers wait unpaid. Small suppliers miss delivery windows and trigger penalty clauses they cannot afford. And notice who absorbs the cost first. Not executives, not shareholders. It is workers, logistics contractors, small firms, and consumers who pay through lost hours, higher prices, and instability. This is the part the media spectacle ignores. Coverage focuses on the visuals: long lines, military hardware, political signaling. What it does not ask is why the system was so fragile to begin with. Why an economy that claims to be resilient cannot tolerate inspections that were once normal. The answer lies in incentives. For decades, corporations demanded open borders for goods, minimal inspections, and streamlined customs. Governments largely complied. Border agencies were redesigned not as regulators, but as facilitators of private logistics efficiency. Staffing was reduced. Oversight was automated. Verification was minimized. Borders became thin membranes rather than robust institutions. That design choice had consequences. It made corporations more profitable, but it also made the entire system dependent on political calm. The moment conflict re-entered the picture, there was no buffer. And this is where the economic lesson begins. Canada's response was not rhetorical. It was structural. If you want a hard border, this is what a hard border actually looks like. And by doing so, Canada demonstrated something usually kept invisible. The movement of goods is power. Control over procedures and compliance can matter as much as tariffs or treaties. This should make you uncomfortable. Not because Canada is wrong to assert sovereignty, but because it reveals how exposed ordinary people are to decisions made far above them. When leaders posture, it is workers who wait in traffic for a day. When systems optimized for profit are stressed, it is social stability that cracks first. So, do not ask who blinked. Ask why the system could not withstand inspection. Ask who designed it that way. And ask who benefited from keeping it fragile. To understand why this border disruption feels so destabilizing, you have to look beneath the headlines and into how modern economies are actually built. What is colliding here is not just policy versus policy. It is two radically different uses of the state. On one side, the state is being used rhetorically as a source of blame, symbolism, and political theater. On the other side, the state is being used operationally, as a set of rules, procedures, and physical controls that shape how the economy truly functions. For years, the public was told that trade was frictionless because it was natural, efficient, and inevitable. But trade was never frictionless by nature. It was frictionless by design. Governments deliberately removed inspections, reduced staffing, automated approvals, and fast-tracked cargo flows because corporate lobbies demanded it. They wanted borders that behaved like toll booths permanently stuck on green. That design choice reshaped everything. Corporate logistics models were built around the assumption that delays would be rare, cursory, and predictable. Labor schedules, delivery contracts, penalty clauses, and pricing structures all assumed uninterrupted flow. Stock valuations quietly embedded those assumptions. Investors priced speed as certainty. When political conflict re-enters that system, the illusion collapses. You cannot suddenly demand rigorous enforcement without slowing everything down. You cannot instantly rebuild human inspection capacity after decades of dismantling it. And you cannot pretend that security can be increased without cost. What Canada did was expose that contradiction. By instructing border agents to do what border agents were originally meant to do, physically inspect goods, verify compliance, and enforce rules, the government revealed how much of modern trade depends on trust rather than enforcement. And trust, once politicized, evaporates fast. Notice what else this action signals, not just to Washington, but to markets. It says access is conditional. Speed is not guaranteed. Trade routes are privileges shaped by policy, not immutable rights. That message is deeply unsettling to corporations because it attacks the foundation of predictability. When predictability weakens, risk calculations change instantly. And once again, the distribution of pain is not equal. Capital hedges. Capital diversifies. Capital lobbies for exemptions. Labor waits unpaid. Small suppliers absorb penalties. Consumers face higher prices framed as temporary, but rarely reversed. This is not incidental. It is structural. Modern supply chains externalize risk downward by design. When systems are stressed, the least powerful participants absorb the shock first. This is why the conversation should never stop at whether inspections are justified. The real question is why basic public oversight now feels like economic warfare. Media coverage avoids that question because it challenges the core narrative of modern capitalism. We are taught that efficiency is neutral, that speed equals progress, and that friction equals failure. But efficiency always serves someone. Speed always has beneficiaries. And friction, when reintroduced, reveals whose interests were prioritized in its removal. There is also a critical geopolitical lesson embedded here. Tariffs target prices. Flow disruptions target production itself. Prices can be absorbed, delayed, or passed on. Production stoppages cannot. They force immediate decisions. They expose dependency. They generate pressure inside firms rather than at borders. This is not escalation by accident. It is escalation by design. And it works precisely because the system was built to avoid it. Pay attention to what is missing from the public debate. No one is asking whether a just-in-time economy is compatible with political volatility. No one is asking whether supply chains optimized for shareholder value can coexist with democratic conflict. No one is asking why workers are expected to absorb the shock every time power struggles erupt at the top. Those are not oversights. They are choices. Once you see that, the border stops looking like a line on a map and starts looking like what it really is: a pressure point in an economic system that assumed pressure would never return. What makes this moment resonate far beyond the border itself is not the traffic, the inspections, or even the political messaging. It is the collapse of an illusion that most people were never meant to question. The illusion that economic systems operate above politics, that markets are neutral, that trade flows because it is natural, not because it is enforced. For decades, people were told that supply chains were technical systems, governed by efficiency and optimization rather than power. But the border reveals the truth. Markets function because states allow them to. And when states choose to exercise authority, even briefly, the system reacts violently because it was never designed to tolerate public control. This is why the disruption feels personal, even to people far from the border. When trucks stop moving, it is not trade statistics that change first. It is the rhythm of everyday life. Auto plants announce schedule adjustments. Grocery stores quietly delay restocking. Prices creep upward without explanation. Hours are cut silently. The public experiences the consequences without ever seeing the cause. This diffusion of pain is not accidental. It is how modern systems protect power. Responsibility is centralized nowhere. Discomfort is distributed everywhere. Workers absorb uncertainty, while executives frame disruption as temporary. Investors demand reassurance. Media narratives soften. Pressure builds to restore speed. And this is where the cycle becomes visible. When enforcement creates friction, private power does not adapt by building resilience. It adapts by demanding exemptions, special lanes, trusted trader programs, private compliance regimes. In other words, corporations seek to escape public oversight rather than coexist with it. Governments compromise. Borders become fast again. The system returns to speed, slightly more opaque than before. Until the next shock, this pattern repeats across labor law, environmental regulation, housing policy, and healthcare systems. Remove friction for capital. Introduce friction for everyone else. When systems fail, blame frontline workers. When enforcement protects the public, call it inefficiency. The language always reveals the hierarchy. That is why border enforcement feels threatening to markets. It reminds them that rules are real, that access is conditional, that speed is a privilege, not a right. And once markets remember that, they demand stability through influence rather than adaptation. There is also a class dimension that cannot be ignored. Executives do not wait in trucks. Investors do not sleep at rest stops. CEOs do not explain delays face-to-face to customers. Those experiences belong to workers. The system ensures that inconvenience flows downward while leverage flows upward. Even the framing exposes this. When corporations face delays, it is called disruption. When workers face delays, it is called inefficiency. One is treated as an external shock, the other as a personal failure. This moment also exposes something deeper. The just-in-time economy was never neutral. It was a gamble. It assumed permanent cooperation, low political conflict, and endless trust between governments whose interests do not always align. That gamble paid off as long as power was exercised quietly and asymmetrically. The moment it became visible, the fragility was exposed. And once people see that fragility, they start asking dangerous questions. Why was redundancy treated as waste? Why was public capacity hollowed out? Why was resilience sacrificed for quarterly returns? And why are workers expected to absorb every shock generated by decisions they did not make? This is why the public conversation is carefully steered toward personality clashes and tactical debates. If disruption is framed as ego, normality can be restored by replacing leaders. But if disruption is structural, then accountability becomes unavoidable. And that is far more threatening to entrenched interests. The border gridlock is not just a warning to Washington. It is a lesson for anyone paying attention. Stability without resilience is fragile. Efficiency without accountability is brittle. And an economy that runs only at full speed has no brakes when it needs them most. The line of idling trucks is not just congestion. It is a map of power. It shows who benefits from speed, who pays for friction, and how quickly the illusion of inevitability collapses when public authority is reasserted. Once you see that, you cannot unsee it. And once enough people see it, the conversation stops being about borders and starts being about design, about who systems are built for, and about what happens when the rules quietly change. That is the fault line that just surfaced, and it will not disappear when traffic clears.